The wind never stopped in Red Willow Valley. It whistled through broken fence posts, bent the dry grass, and swept dust across miles of land that belonged to one man, Jack Hollister. For 10 years, he had lived alone on his ranch, working from dawn till dusk, speaking to no one but his horse and the land. Folks in town called him the Loner Rancher. Some said he'd lost his family to fever. Others said to war. No one really knew. Jack didn't correct them. The truth didn't matter anymore. Every morning, he saddled his old bay horse, rode the pastures, and watched over the cattle that were both his curse and his salvation. One evening, as the sun melted into the hills, Jack heard the sound of a wagon breaking down near the south ridge. It was rare for anyone to pass that way. When he reached the site, he saw a young woman kneeling beside a broken wheel. Her dress was dusty, her bonnet askew, and a single strand of golden hair clung to her cheek. "You hurt?" he asked gruffly. She looked up, startled. "No, sir. Just the wheel. My name's Clara Dane. I was headed toward Willow Bend, but I think I took the wrong road." Jack dismounted, crouched by the wagon, and examined the axle. "You're more than a few miles off. Nearest help's my ranch." Clara hesitated. "I don't want to trouble you." "You already have," he said, but not unkindly. "Let's go." At Red Willow Ranch, Clara stepped down from his wagon into the fading light. The place looked as lonely as its owner, wide pastures, a sagging barn, and a porch that creaked with memories. Jack poured her water from the pump. "You can stay till morning. After that, I'll take you back to the main road." "Thank you," she said softly. That night, Clara sat by the fire, her fingers warming against the glow. She told him she'd lost her parents to a fever and had come west in search of work, maybe as a teacher, maybe as a farmhand. Anything to start again. Jack listened quietly, his eyes on the fire. "The land's cruel to folks who come looking for a new life," he said. She smiled faintly. "Maybe it's cruel because it wants to see if you're strong enough to stay." He looked up at her then, surprised, and for the first time in years, something inside him stirred. Days turned to weeks. The storm that night had ruined the wagon beyond repair, and Jack, though he wouldn't admit it, didn't seem in a hurry to fix it. Clara began helping around the ranch, feeding chickens, mending fences, cooking suppers that filled the silent house with warmth. Bit by bit, Red Willow Ranch began to change. Flowers returned near the porch. The air seemed softer. And Jack, he began to talk again. He told her about the years he'd spent alone, the land he almost sold, the nights he couldn't sleep for remembering. She listened without judgment, her calm voice melting his rough edges. One morning, Clara found him repairing the barn door. She laughed softly. "You work like the world depends on it." He didn't look up. "It's the only way I know how to keep from thinking." "About what?" He paused. "About how quiet it gets when the sun goes down." Her voice trembled just slightly. "Then maybe it's time someone else helped fill that quiet." Their eyes met, and for a long moment, neither spoke. That evening, rain rolled across the valley, heavy and sudden. They took shelter in the barn, thunder echoing above. Clara looked out at the storm. "It's strange," she said, "how storms sound lonelier when you're alone." Jack glanced at her, his voice low. "You're not alone anymore, Clara." And though nothing more was said, something changed in that silence, a promise made without words. The months passed gently. Clara stayed on, saying little about the life she'd left behind, and Jack never asked. Together they worked the land, side by side, sunrise to sunset. The townsfolk began to talk. Hollister's found himself a lady, they whispered, but Jack didn't care what they said. For the first time in a decade, his house felt alive. But peace on the prairie never lasts long. One afternoon, a stranger rode in from the west, a thin man in a black coat, eyes sharp as broken glass. He asked for Clara. When Jack stepped onto the porch, hand resting on his holster, the man smiled coldly. "Name's Vince Dane. Her brother. She ran off, left debts behind. I've come to collect." Clara's face went pale. "Jack, please. He's lying." Vince spat in the dirt. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, sister. I can sell this ranch for enough to settle what you owe." Jack's voice was calm but deadly. "You'll do no such thing." The man sneered. "And who's gonna stop me?" "You." Jack didn't answer. He just stepped closer, eyes steady. The wind stilled. The ranch fell silent except for the low groan of the barn door. Vince's hand twitched toward his gun, but Jack was faster. One shot rang out across the valley, echoing through the canyon like thunder. Vince fell. Clara gasped, covering her mouth. Jack holstered his gun, face grim. "He would have hurt you." Tears ran down her cheeks. "But now they'll come for you, Jack." He nodded. "I know." By nightfall, the sheriff was on his way. Jack knew he couldn't stay, not after taking a man's life, even in defense. He packed his saddle quietly while Clara stood by the barn, rain starting to fall again. "Don't go," she whispered. "We can tell them the truth." "The truth don't matter out here, Clara. Folks see what they want to see." She stepped closer, tears glistening in her eyes. "Then what was all this for? The work, the laughter, us?" Jack's voice broke for the first time. "It was everything. But I ain't the kind of man who gets to keep something good." She reached for him, her hand trembling. "Please, Jack." He touched her cheek once, rough fingers, gentle as wind, then turned away. By morning, the storm had cleared. The sun rose over the valley, spilling gold across the ranch. Clara stood on the porch, watching the distant trail fade into the horizon where Jack Hollister had ridden away. He left behind no note, no goodbye. Only a broken fence he hadn't finished mending and a heart that would never stop waiting. But in that quiet, she smiled through her tears, because somewhere out there, beyond the red hills, the loner rancher was still riding, keeping his promise in the only way he knew how.